Hello, does it work? Yeah? Good morning. Thank you for being here today. So my name is Jean-François Bobier. I'm a partner and director at Bolson Consulting Group. I'm leading our quantum computing expertise center at BCG. I don't know if you are aware, but Boston Consulting Group has been publishing papers on quantum computing since 2018. We have published about 8 papers. Many of them are used in the quantum computing community, and I'm going to share with you what we think about the market and our latest research. So, quantum computing is a deep tech that is accelerating a lot. As you can see here, you see how much money has been raised in the past years. This year is particularly interesting. You don't see it on the slide, but you probably heard about some of the big deals this year. For example, IonQ, a quantum computing hardware manufacturer, raised $650 million. They are now on the New York Stock Exchange. They did a SPAC, and they are worth, depending on when you look at, they are worth $3 to $4 billion. That's the market cap of IonQ. And they don't even really sell computers right now. So it's a very interesting topic. If you look also at other investment this year, there were Xanadu, who raised $100 million. PsiQuantum, with another company who raised $450 million. So a lot of activities. And for a technology that is still at TRL 5, so you will ask me, why so much money, why so much interest for a technology that is still relatively unproven? So I will try to explain you why it's so important. So I think we need to start with what these computers do and why they bring some advantage compared to the computers that we have right now. On classical computers, basically, as you know, you manipulate the basic unit of information is a bit. It's either 0 or 1. And when you run a program, you hope that every time you run it, you will get the same result, right? For example, if I do 1 plus 1 on a classical computer, I hope that I will always get 2, right? In a quantum computing world, you manipulate a complete new unit of information called qubit. And those qubits, they are actually probabilistic. So it's like a spinning coin. There are many ways to describe it. There is no way to simplify it to the right way, but one way to see it is, okay, I've got a spinning coin, and it's 1 and 0 at the same time. And every time I do a calculation, actually, I manipulate the probabilities of this spinning coin. So when I stop it at any point, it might be 60% of chance on tails and 40% on heads. And then at the next computation, maybe it will be 70, 30. And what is interesting about quantum computing, and it's really difficult to think about it, is that a program, you can run the same program twice, 1 plus 1, for example, and you might not get the same answer all the time because of the probabilistic nature. So, for example, there is a very famous algorithm I'll talk about later called the Shor's algorithm, which is about factoring a number into primes. It gets you the right result with a 50% chance. So you need to run it at least 2 or 3 times to make sure that you get the right result. And it's because of the probabilistic nature of this computing. So one consequence of that is that programming these machines is an entirely new way of thinking. So you need to think about manipulating probabilities, getting, amplifying the results you want when you measure the result at the end. And what is also interesting is that it has ushered innovations on the classical side, meaning that starting to think differently about the algorithm actually allowed researchers to, it's called dequantize, so to take a quantum algorithm back into classical and actually make classical even better. So it's also a new discipline in terms of how you think programming. You will tell me, okay, 1 qubit is good. It's funny to manipulate probabilities of 1 qubit, but okay, what's the benefit of this thing? We just talk about superposition of states, so the possibility you have to have the 0 and 1 in just one unit. But if you combine it with another quantum property, which is called entanglement, it's become even more interesting. So on this slide here, you see 3 qubits that are entangled, so connected together, right? And they behave as one. You have to trust me, it's quantum mechanics. You can make the behave as one, which means that these 3 qubits, at any point of time, they are in 8 possible states, as you can see. They can be 0, 0, 0, right? They can be 0, 0, 1. They can be 0, 1, 0, etc. at any point in time. And when I measure their state, I will be in either one of these 8 states. And as you can, because the states are linked, and because the sum of the probabilities of finding one of them is always 1, obviously, even if you manipulate just qubit A and you do a qubit operation just on the first qubit, what you're doing, you're changing the states of qubit B and C at the same time. Why? Because the sum of, as I mentioned, the sum of probability is always 1. So even changing one state of 1 qubit has an impact on the states of all the other qubits. So in a way, and it's not exactly like that, but you could think of as this being a massively parallel operation. So in one operation, I affect all the probabilities of all the states at the same time, right? So that gives you an exponential speed up. That is what is actually super interesting in quantum computing. And to give you, so unfortunately with COVID, we've been now aware that exponentials can be tricky, right? And if you just take 30 qubits, and today the best computers are more in the 100 qubit range, with just 30 qubits, you've got 2 to the power of 30 number of states at the same time. I spare you the computation, but it's 1 billion already, just with 30 qubits. So you manipulate 1 billion different states. So what we are looking for in quantum computing is to get on certain problems, very specific problems, an exponential speed up over classical computing. And exponentials change everything, obviously, because you get an exponential speed up. So what used to be impossible, Shor algorithm is a good example, suddenly becomes possible. So a whole new category of problems that we can't compute today become computable, and that's why the companies I just mentioned earlier are worth so much money, because people are interested in solving those problems. I'm going to talk about those problems, and to tell them, I think we need to go back to the 2 fathers of quantum computing, in my opinion. So the first one is Richard Feynman. So Richard Feynman was a physicist. He was the youngest group leader in Los Alamos. He was actually in charge of computing the critical mass of the atom bomb. And very early on, in the 40s, he was already trying to solve complex equations, and at the time there was no computer, so he had to find ways to be very clever about doing his computation. And in 1981, he wrote a paper proposing quantum computing. And it was really the start of the quantum computing revolution, and I'll explain why he wrote that paper. And then, about 10 years later, a completely different personality, Peter Shor, is not a physicist, he is a mathematician. And he looked at what quantum computers can do from a mathematical standpoint. What are the mathematics behind it? What can we do with it? And he played with equations, and he realized that he could solve a problem which is unsolvable today, which is the factoring of a number into primes. And when he wrote his paper, the next day he was called by the NSA, right? We told him, what? You can factor a number into primes in a polynomial time. And as you know, today it's all your communication on the internet are secured by the fact but it's impossible to do that on classical computers. So that's why the spy agencies are obviously interested in this technology. And it helps quantum computing a lot to get attention and to get funding because obviously they invested with that. So let's start with Feynman. And so Feynman is a physicist, and basically what he came from the realization that the nature is not classical, right? All of the things that happen, the matter, the light interactions, except gravity, are all explained by quantum mechanics, right? And he said those classical computers, they are not fit to the purpose of simulating this nature. And I'll explain why later. And so that's why he proposed, okay, we need a computer that actually mirrors how nature works. And this is why we need quantum computers. So really, Feynman ushered the quantum computers to simulate nature. And this has applications for us that are very interesting. So the main one, obviously, is about chemistry and material science in general. As you know, if you take relatively large molecules or even molecules with, let's say, a few dozen atoms, you can't simulate their energy levels. You can't simulate whether they will bind to one another. You can't simulate the computational dynamics in a chemical reaction on a classical computer. You can get some results, but they are approximated at best, and they don't really work well. So it's an area where obviously quantum computers can open up a big opportunity, because instead of going to the lab, for example, you want to design a new material that is lightweight, durable, easy to manufacture, that has specific properties. Right now, you need to synthesize it, to test it, and continue. The power of the quantum computers would be to eliminate the lab completely and to do it in silico in the chip, to look at the properties from the chip, and then to iterate a lot of different materials. And that's the promise of a quantum computer, and that's where it could revolutionize material science, chemicals, because you eliminate the tedious lab process and you can iterate much more. There is another area where the quantum mechanics equations are in play, which is computational fluid dynamics. So this is the plane that you see on the bottom. Do you know that Airbus or Boeing, they still use wind tunnels today? This is crazy, right? We've got the best supercomputers on Earth, right? And they still use wind tunnels. It's not because they like wind tunnels, it's just because the equations that govern fluid are so complex that you can't simulate them properly on a computer. You can do an approximation, but some small turbulences that you see, for example, on the tip of the wing here, right? They will become very strong, and you will miss them early on the computation. If you do on even the best systems, what they do is that they decompose the wing into polygons, and they try to solve the equations, but in a simplified way. So you have to use a wind tunnel to figure out how the wind will really react to the wing, and it's necessary today. That's why Airbus last year launched the Airbus Quantum Challenge, and actually they have a partnership with QCware, and they train engineers every year on quantum computing. Is because they are looking for new ways to compute these complex equations. And it could allow Airbus, for example, to design new wings, entirely new wings that have specific properties in terms of air penetration and other things that you can't simulate on a classical computer. So you could, again, like the material science example, you could try a lot of wing designs. You would not go to the wind tunnel, but you could do it on the computer and iterate until you find something that is much better. So here, just a backup to tell you how complicated is it to compute. So for example, I took the example of energy state of a molecule. So the energy state, for example, at what determines the light, the color. So if you take this, if this is black, and it's black because it has a specific energy level. So when light comes to these molecules, the light that goes back is determined by the energy levels of a molecule. And to compute that is actually very difficult. And if you take proteins, for example, you would need more transistors that there are atoms in the universe to do that. Right? So you can't do it on a classical computer. There's just no way. And last year, Google made the breakthrough and simulated the first chemical reaction on a quantum computer. Obviously, it's a very simple, chemistry problem which involves hydrogen, so which is a very simple atom. But as the computers will become better, we can expect that we will be able to tackle much more complex molecules in the coming years. So next, the second favor, I talked about mathematics, and of course, the most famous algorithm in quantum computer is called Shor's algorithm. And again, it's a mathematician, so he didn't care about physics. It looked at what he could do if a quantum computer were available from a mathematical standpoint. And actually, there are a lot of problems that are relevant with that. So obviously, factoring primes is one of them, and security in general is one of them. But another example is that I don't know if you look at how banks evaluate risk and options, but most of the mathematics behind it are based on a technique called Monte Carlo, so random walks, right? You have a probability distribution of events, and you do random walks to evaluate the price of an option because an option is based on a lot of uncertainties. For example, the price of the currency next year, the rate of unemployment, stuff like that, and you need to project these uncertainties over time and to see how they could evolve. And I don't want to enter the mathematics here, but a quantum computer is actually well suited to look at all the possible works of an option in just in one go. And so then you could evaluate exactly an option, as opposed to now where we don't evaluate exactly an option. We do, 10,000 random walks, and then we do the average, and that's the price of the option. So that's why finance is looking very closely at quantum computing, because there are use cases that are very relevant for finance. And then the last problem that is very relevant for mathematics, and it's, as you know, there's a mathematical category called NP-hard problems. And quantum computers are very good at some NP-hard problems, and one of them is the traveling salesman problem. So I'm a traveling salesman, so I need to visit Chicago, New York, Boston, and I need to optimize the best itinerary for me. You don't need to trust me, but even Google cannot get you the best result, at least in a certain amount of time. If you are just a few cities, you can do it. But if you have a lot of cities, it's an NP-hard problem, so you can't do it in a polynomial time. So what you do is that you get an approximation when you compute it. But the quantum computer can get you the exact result. So it could have benefits, for example, in logistics. But there are a lot of problems that can be derived into the traveling salesman problem. So okay, I'm going to skip that one, and because I have just 1 more minute. And I'm going to so you get a glimpse of what this quantum computer can do. And then what we did is that we say, okay, these are the possibilities. And then we published two papers about, okay, what are now the use cases? What can we do? I gave you a glimpse, of course, of what it can be done. And we try to quantify and to look at the use cases. And so there is a paper you can download on bcg.com, and basically our point of view is that the quantum computers could, at the end of the day, could generate between 400 to $800 billion of value for the economy by 2040, probably sooner, we hope. And here you see some of the use cases that I just described. And those are the industries that will be touched. And as you can see, there are almost no industry that is touched, everybody is concerned. So the nice thing about computing is that it's really a technology that applies to a lot of use cases and basically to all industries. And then I'm gonna conclude there. But we work with quantum computing companies, and what they're also interested in the startups. What kind of revenues they can generate, and we have also started to determine what could be their revenues, and so how can they grow, what could be their market share, and so this is the bottom line that you see on the slide. And I don't know if I have time for questions, but thank you for having listened to me.